Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Pargeter of Kingspan. So would you ask Mr. Pargeter to come back in, please? Good morning, Mr. Pargeter.
Good morning.
Ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Morning, members of the panel. Good morning, Mr. Pargeter. Can I go back to some evidence that you gave late yesterday afternoon, day 83, and ask you please to be shown page 210 of the transcript. And at line 19, page 210 of the transcript, that's not right, I'm afraid. Yesterday afternoon, in any event, and I can show you this if need be when I get the right reference, is that you were telling us about 785 tests.
Yes.
And you said, and I'll try and summarise it, that the 13785 test proves a difference at a much lower output of fire. And you said that the more fire output you put on it, the less likely there's going to be any type of difference, particularly from a facer which is a 20th of a millimetre thick in aluminium. And I'm sorry I can't at the moment put my hand on the transcript, but that was the thrust of your evidence yesterday.
That's correct.
Now, as a matter of fact, to your knowledge, did Kingspan ever obtain an independent expert opinion to support what you've told us?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Because we found no evidence in the record that the opinion that you expressed yesterday afternoon in your evidence was commonly held within the technical team. Is that correct?
No, I don't think so.
Well, who in the technical team, to your knowledge, at the time, held the same opinion that you expressed to us in evidence yesterday afternoon about the 13785 tests?
At the time of the 13785 tests were done?
At any time between 2014 and 2019?
I think Adam Heath may have been of the same opinion after seeing the 13785 tests, for example.
Well, do you know of any documents where this opinion was recorded?
No, just in the test reports that we've got.
Has Kingspan ever performed a like-for-like, properly instrumented BS8414 test where the only parameter varied between two otherwise identical tests was the thickness of the foil facer or the presence of perforations in the foil facer?
No, not that I'm aware.
Now, I want to turn back to where we were yesterday when we stopped. And I want to ask you about the 2014 test, by which I mean the one in July 2014.
Yes.
Can we go then first to your third witness statement at KIN 3022610? And let's look at the middle of page 56, where we can see inquiry 85, or inquiries question 85A. And question 85 relates back to paragraph 4.42 of your second witness statement, where you say that the July 2004 test may have used K15 produced for a development project. And the question under A is, when specifically did it first come to your knowledge that there was some confusion as to the insulation board tested? And your response to that appears on page 56, just below that at paragraph 7.16. And I'll just show it to you. You say, in October/November 2014, as explained in paragraph 45 above, at this time I was product development manager and I was involved in discussions about this test because it was relevant to our research and development work looking at a low lambda version of K15. I was not involved in discussions or decisions to use this test to support the use of standard K15 in buildings over 18 metres, and I only made the connection that the test I was involved in from a product development perspective in July 2014 was being used to support the use of standard K15 when it was raised by Insulation UK solicitors in early 2019 during the disclosure exercise for the purposes of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. Now, just to be completely clear, are you saying here that in July 2014, because of your involvement in the development of the low lambda product at that time, you knew at that time that the product being tested in that test was not standard K15, but a development product?
Yes, that's what I understood that test
Yes.
Was.
And you're saying also, again to be clear, that you only discovered that the July 2014 test was being used to support the use of standard K15 in early 2019 during the disclosure exercise.
That's correct.
Right. And you're absolutely sure about that, are you?
Yes.
Right. Now, let's continue. At the bottom of page 56, I showed you the paragraph. Just want to identify the precise sentence I want to ask you about. You say, in the fourth line, I was not involved in discussions or decisions to use this test to support the use of standard K15 in buildings over 18 metres. Now, are you saying that there were indeed discussions and decisions on that topic?
Well, there must have been, because we did rely on that test in the literature.
Indeed. Do you know who was involved in those discussions and decisions?
At the time, I thought it probably would have been either using that test to support it and providing it to the marketing teams for doing the routes to compliance document.
You say, at the time, I thought it probably would have been either. At what time?
At the time when we understood that that test was being used. So I understood then in February 2019, we confirmed that was that test that was being relied on, which was in the literature.
Right. So in 2019, when you say you first discovered this, you thought, looking back on it, it would have been either.
Yes.
I see. Who else?
I didn't think anyone else at the time.
So did you think in February 19 that Ivor Meredith would have been a sole actor in using the July 2014 test in K15's marketing literature for standard K15?
Potentially, yes.
Really? A sole actor, solely responsible?
I think he would have provided the report to the teams in the marketing teams to use in the literature.
Did you, in February 2019, investigate that question and find out whether he really was a sole actor, as you suspected, or whether there was anybody else involved?
I looked back at it because obviously it happened on my watch, which I was really disappointed about, and tried to work out where that error had occurred. I looked at the report. The report referenced it as K15 and not as a development product or a low lambda product.
Which report? The July report?
The test report, yes. And then just looking back at the documents, thought that was probably the likely case.
Did you look at any of the email chains and correspondence and communications internally on the subject?
Not at that point. I don't
So you wouldn't have been able to tell simply by looking at the test report who within your organisation was involved, such as, for example, Tony Millichap?
Yes, correct.
I'm right, aren't I?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you suspected Ivor Meredith of being a sole actor, you didn't think about Tony Millichap?
No, I didn't.
And you didn't think about anybody else, for example, Richard Burnley, the UK Managing Director?
No, I didn't.
No. Or Peter Wilson, the UK Divisional Director?
No.
Why is that?
I just didn't think they would have understood that detail.
Really? Okay. Now, I just want to read you or show you a part of Tony Millichap's evidence about knowledge of the July 2014 test being used to market standard K15. It's day 82, page 76. And I'd like to show you line 3 onwards. And it goes over the page to page 77. Just as Miss Grange was fair to Mr. Millichap in giving him a lot of run-up to it, I'll do the same for you. If you go to page 76, line 3, she puts to Mr. Millichap this. Now, in fairness to you, we want to put this to you. Were you saying that you shouldn't have a marketing campaign because it wasn't a compelling story? Answer, I pointed out that if we were moving to that product, which was fully the intention, then obviously that product needs to be identified as a different product. Who had pointed that out to you? I'd seen that in a couple of, definitely the fire focus group, I think predominantly, so the senior team responsible, right? question, did any of these men know that the test had been carried out was actually on a research and development product? Do you know? How widely was that information known within Kingspan? Yes, I believe it would have been. I mean, Richard Bromwich was the most senior, representing the sales efforts. He would have been kept abreast of those developments. I don't recall, but I believe he would have been invited to the fire focus group. I'm not sure if he attended. Right. Question, what about Adrian Pargeter? Did he know that it was a trial product that was different to that you were selling? Answer, yes, I believe it was common knowledge. And then he goes on, did you disagree in the event with the plan to promote and market standard K15 on the basis of the test that you knew not to have been on that K15? Answer, it's difficult to recall the exact chronology. And then it goes on. Do you agree with Mr. Millichap's evidence that it was common knowledge that a test on an R&D product was being used to market standard K15?
I don't think it was common knowledge.
Do you dispute what Mr. Millichap says that you personally knew that fact?
I didn't understand that that test was what was being represented in the literature.
So you dispute what he says in his evidence, do you?
I do, yes.
Now let's look at some documents. Your role, as you told us, in marketing and promotion of K15 began in November 2014, didn't it?
Yes.
You told us that in your statement, your second statement at paragraph 4.17. And you've told us that you were unaware that the July 2014 test that you'd been involved in from a product development point of view had been used to market standard K15 until you discovered that in early 19. So does it follow from that, I think it must do, that at no time between your taking over your role as marketing and promotion head, chief, in 2014 and early 2019, in all those years, did you discover this fact?
No, I didn't.
Let's examine that a little bit more closely still. Let's start by looking at the Routes to Compliance Fire Safety Technical Bulletin released in August 2015. This is at KIN 6086. Let's have that up. I want to have that up just to put it on the screen for the moment. That is the document dated August 2015, and at that time you were by then head of technical and marketing, so you'd had both roles.
Correct.
Yes. Now, before we go deeper into the document, can I take you to your second witness statement, please, at page 23, and let's look together at paragraph 4.19 there in the middle of the page. And you say there, one of the main promotional documents created since 2014 was the guide entitled Routes to Compliance, Fire Safety for Facades, incorporating Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board on buildings with a habitable story 18 metres or greater above ground level, the first issue of which was published in August 2015. As explained at paragraph 4.26d of my first witness statement, this document aimed to explain the various routes available to achieve compliance, including option B under the ADB and the use of desktop studies. And just so that everyone else is clear, option B, of course, is the alternative route to compliance, where you don't have a non-combustible product or a product of limited combustibility.
That's correct.
Yeah. Let's then look at paragraph 4.21 at the bottom. You say this: my role in preparing the technical content of the first issue of this bulletin was limited, as by the time I took over as head of technical in May 2015, most of the drafting and compilation of the relevant test data had already been completed by Ivor Meredith, technical project manager, and Tony Millichap, head of technical. You see that?
Yes.
And then it goes on to say that you worked with the team to ensure the document reflected the guidance provided in BCA TGN 18, that's Technical Guidance Note 18, and also became involved in the reviewing of drafts of the Route to Compliance document. The first issue of the Routes to Compliance document was signed off by me from a marketing perspective, following reviews by John Garbett, as he was the Divisional Marketing Director for Kingspan, as this was a significant piece of literature. It was also sent to Richard Bromwich, Commercial Director, and Richard Burnley, UK Managing Director, on the 24th of July 2015 before final sign-off. Now, that's a long bit of background, but I want to examine it a little bit with you. But let's look at the document, KIN 6086. This is the final form as issued. But can we take it that this is also the document you signed off before it went to Mr. Bromwich and Mr. Burnley?
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, I take it that the changes they made were either minimal or none at all.
If any, yes.
Yes. Can we look at page 17? And we can see the heading at the top of the page, Appendix B, large-scale test data. And we looked at this yesterday, and under it says, build-ups incorporating Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board successfully tested to BS8414 Part 1 2002 and BS8414 Part 2 2005 in accordance with the performance criteria set out in BR 135. Now, the first build-up we can see, as we saw yesterday, is on the left-hand side of those diagrams. That's the 2005 test, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think you agreed yesterday that that, in fact, is a misleading representation there, because, in fact, the K15 in that test was not K15 as sold in August 2015. You accepted that that was misleading in that respect.
I accepted that fact.
That fact.
It was misleading.
Yes. Now, looking at the third build-up in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see a terracotta tile cladding with a steel frame with report number 291642. That was a reference, wasn't it, to the BRE classification report for the July 2014 test?
I believe so, yes.
And if you go back to page... yes, if you go to the diagram above it on page 17, you can see that the K15 is said to be 80 millimetres Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board. But again, it wasn't, was it? It wasn't K15, it was the development product.
That's correct.
So in that respect, also, this technical bulletin was false and misleading.
That was inaccurate.
Well, it was false and misleading.
It was definitely inaccurate. I wouldn't say it was misleading, but it was inaccurate.
Well, you say it was inaccurate, but not false and misleading. I don't want to spend hours debating the semantics of fraud with you, but I just want to understand really how you come to that distinction. Let's break it down. Do you agree that the statement 80 millimetres Kingspan Cooltherm K15 was erroneous?
Yes, I agree.
Do you agree that anybody reading that would then would fall into error because they would think it was K15 as being sold when in fact it wasn't?
Yes, I agree.
Do you accept that they would thereby be misled?
Yes, I accept that.
And so you agree with me that it's a false statement which would be apt to mislead somebody who didn't know the truth?
Yes, I
Thank
agree.
you. Now, given that you knew in July 2014, because of your involvement in the development of the low lambda product, that the product being tested was not standard K15, you must have known when you signed off on this document on the 24th of July 2014 that this statement here, which I've just shown you, was false and misleading.
No, I didn't make the connection that that was that test at the time.
Did you read this document when you signed it off?
Yes, I did.
Did you read page 17, Appendix B, when you signed it off?
Yes, I did.
Did you look at the diagrams on that page when you signed it off?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain how you didn't spot, when you read the third diagram on that page when you signed it off, the fact that it stated that Kingspan K15 rain screen board was used in test for report 291642?
I just assumed that that was a test on the standard product and not the development test we'd done earlier.
I don't understand that.
Correctly.
You knew, as at July 2014, that the test that you'd done at that time, which resulted in that report, which has got a number there, was done on a research and development product. You've told us that a number of times.
Yes, I did, and I didn't make that connection for this report.
Explain.
I just assumed this was done on the standard product, this particular one, and I didn't make the connection that that test was the development test. And
Well,
that
what,
was an
what
error.
test did you think it was?
I just thought it was a standard product.
But there'd only been one successful 8414 test on the standard product, and that was the 2005 test, which is the subject of the diagram on the top left-hand side, isn't it?
Yes.
So you would have realised, looking at this, that this test was a different test.
I didn't realise it.
Well, I can't understand that.
It was an error on my part.
Well, it's quite a fundamental error, isn't it?
I just assumed it was a standard test.
Well, did you say you just assumed it was a standard test? And I'm sorry to press this a little bit, but I'm afraid that's just not really a credible answer. And I'd just like you to explain how you made the assumption, given that you'd read this document thoroughly. Well, maybe you didn't. Did you read it thoroughly?
I think I did, yes.
Yes. I mean, you were head, and this was an important document that had gone through a number of drafts, and you were sending it up to Burnley and Bromwich for their final sign-off.
That's correct.
And it was going to the market as a positive piece of advice about how safely to apply K15 above 18 metres. I'm going to assume, unless you tell me otherwise, that you did read it thoroughly. Now, having read it thoroughly, you need to explain to us how it was that you assumed that report number 291642 was not the report for the test done in July 2014 on a research and development product.
I think I just relied on the data that was provided, and I didn't look into that element of it deeply.
It stands out from the page, though, that here are at least 2 successful 8414 tests. Forget the one on the top right-hand corner. You must have known at the time that there was only one successful 8414 test in relation to standard K15, and that was in 2005, and even that wasn't in relation to standard K15.
No, I didn't make that connection.
Right. Let's look at a little bit more into the detail. Can we go to an email chain a little earlier in 2015? This is May, NHB 401109. This is an email at the top from Ivor Meredith to various members of the NHBC and Kingspan, including you, Mr. Pargeter. Can you see that you're copied in on it?
Yes.
And it goes to Graham Perrier of the NHBC. He says, "Hi, Graham, we would welcome a chance to catch up. And as discussed previously, we'd be happy to extend the invitation for you to visit our production facilities in Pembridge, Herefordshire, etc." And then in the next line, he says, "This would also be a good opportunity for you to come to meet our new head of technical, Adrian Pargeter." Now, just pausing there, when you received this email as a copy party, did you read it?
I believe I did, yes.
Yeah. And then you can see that there is a set, towards the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2, a set of questions and answers. And the answers are in red from Mr. Meredith to questions which had been posed by the NHBC. And I just want to look at point 2 over the page on page 2, please, with you. It says there, during a previous meeting, it was mentioned that a BR135 certificate exists for the terracotta fire test. It would be most helpful if you could send a copy of this certificate. And it says, attached to previous correspondence as sent on the 28th. Now, given that this is May 2015, it's clear, isn't it, that Kingspan had only undertaken one large-scale fire test using a terracotta rain screen, for which it had a test report as at this date, and that was the July 2014 test.
That's my understanding now, yes.
Was your understanding now, you say? Why was it not your understanding when you received this email?
Because I don't think I was 100% sure just what tests had been done. I was aware that that test on the terracotta for the development test was being done, but I don't think I was fully aware of other tests that may have been done.
But you were head of technical at this stage?
Just, yes.
Just
taking
admittedly,
over.
I agree. It's the end of May, and presumably you'd only just stepped into the role at that stage. But were you not interested to get a grip on precisely what tests had been done on K15?
I think, yes, I would have been.
And you would, no doubt, in that role, being new to the role and presumably being quite keen to carry it out to the best of your ability, have discovered that the test being referred to was indeed the test done in July 2014.
I didn't make that connection, no.
You didn't make that connection. What connection did you make? What did you think Mr. Meredith was talking about when he refers to a BR135 certificate for the terracotta test which had been attached to previous correspondence?
I just assumed he was talking about a test on the standard product,
But why?
because I wasn't fully aware of what we had and hadn't done at that stage.
Were you not interested to see it?
I can't say that I did.
That would have been a pretty slack approach for somebody new to a senior job. Is that how you normally operated?
No.
No. Now, he says, attached to previous correspondence sent on the 28th, if you scroll down 2 emails in the chain, so this is the chain that comes to you, to page 3, please, you can see that here is the email which Ivor Meredith is referring to, which he sends to Graham Perrier and Ian Davis at the NHBC, copy to others at the NHBC. Trust all is well. Please find attached BS 8414 Part 2 report, which includes 12mm CP board sheathing and relevant BR 135 classification. We will follow with an update and address your questions below. Now, the Kingspan document that we've been given doesn't have the attachment, but the corresponding NHBC document, the incoming email to them, does. I just want to show you that. It's NHB 401086. And just so that you can be clear about what it is that's being sent. And that's the email from NHBC's disclosure. And if you go to NHB 401087, you can see the attachment. And there it is. And it is BR135 classification report number 291642. That's the number for the classification report that we saw in the bottom right-hand corner diagram in the August routes to compliance document, isn't it?
Yes.
And it is clear from this that the issue date is the 14th of April 2015, and that's issue 2. And it is, if you go down to page 3, page 2, I'm so sorry, page 2, you can see the test date, just so that we're clear. 14th. My fault. That's the date of the report, but the date of the actual test is on page 4. It's not. And I have misled you by accident. The test isn't actually on there. But do you, looking at that, recognise this document at all?
The classification report, yes.
You do. And perhaps we can get there simply by looking at page 6. And if you look at the system, the description of product under paragraph 2.2, you can see the system as built comprises the system that was tested in July 2014, doesn't it?
Yes, it is.
So that although I'm unable, I think, to provide the precise date to you as a simple means of identifying what this is about, nonetheless, I think you accept that you were copied in, it looks like, on an email chain in late May 2015, which identifies the BRE test for the July 2014 test and shows what it was. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And if we go to the next attachment, NHB 401088, that is the BRE test report 297099, as you can see, also issue 2, also 14th of April 2015, you see that. And that's the test report that goes with the classification report. That is also for the July test, isn't it?
Yes.
And on this document, we can see the date for the July test. It's on page 5. Date of test, if we just go over to that, 7th of July 2014. Now, going back to the email, if we can, to the NHBC, and we can go to, we can go back to the one at the end of May, if you like, which is at NHB 401109. We can see there that there's no mention at all to the NHBC that this test was only on a research and development product and not reflective of standard K15, is there?
That's correct.
And do you accept that this chain demonstrates that you were aware that the July 2014 test was being relied upon by Kingspan to support the use of standard K15 by virtue of it being sent to the NHBC at the end of May 2015?
Like I said, I didn't make the connection that that was that test at the time.
I mean, it's right, isn't it, that the only reason to send these two documents, the test report and the classification report, to the NHBC was in order to indicate to them that K15 was covered, standard K15 was covered by a relevant BS 8414 test.
That's correct.
But you say you didn't spot the point.
No.
Let's go on. If we go to the email chain with the BBA, 14th of August 2015, BBA 50951, BBA 50951. If you go to the top of the chain, this is an email from Dan Ball, 14th of August 2015 to Gayatri Ramkaran, and it's copied to you, among others, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Again, would you have seen this, opened it, read it when you received it?
I may not have done, but I possibly could have done.
Right. And the attachments are the classification report, BR135 291642. So again, the July 2014 test and other documents. And Dan Ball, who is the technical project leader, says, these are the new report stroke constructions that we wish to add to the reissue of the K15 certificate. Second to be issued under the cool therm combo. Gayatri, and we have permission from others to use their reports as well, all attached. See Adam's email below as well, Gayatri. Now, we can see from the attachments that they include the BR classification 291642, as I've just shown you. So it follows from this, doesn't it, that here is Kingspan sending the July 2014 BR135 class report to the BBA. That's what they're doing.
Yes, that's correct.
And you can see that happening, yes?
Yes, I can.
Didn't you wonder why Dan Ball was doing that, given that, as you would have it, the K15 in that test was a low lambda product and not a K15 standard product?
No, again, I didn't make that connection at the time.
Right. So no connection in the May email run, no connection in the August email run, and no connection in the August document that you signed off in 2015.
That's correct.
Right. Let's then look at the certificate. BBA 50201. This is the BBA certificate for K15, reissued on the 8th of October 2015, as you can see from the bottom of that page on the screen there. And if you go to page 5, please. So this is only 3 months or so after the August document. We see section 8 here, behaviour in relation to fire, and under 8.2 it says, when tested to BS 8414 Part 1 2002 or BS 8514 Part 2 2005, the following specific cladding constructions met the criteria as stated in BR Report BR 135 2013. And then there are 4 constructions set out over the bottom of page 5 and the top of page 6. Construction 1 is 60mm K15 insulation board, and then 6mm cement particle boards mechanically fixed. That's the 2005 test, isn't it?
Correct.
Yes, and one can look over to page 6 and see the rest of it, which would confirm that. And then 3 further constructions, construction 2, construction 3, and construction 4. Construction 2 is a build-up using the Carrier mineral composite grooved panels, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Construction 3, it was the July 2014 terracotta test, wasn't it?
Yes.
And construction 4 is the Kingspan test done in 2015 with the Taylor Maxwell terracotta tiles in April 2015. 21st of April 2015, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, if you're in doubt about that, I can show you your schedule that you attach to your 4th witness statement.
No, I was aware of the April test.
Right. And for the record, that is confirmed at KIN 30 22357. Now, this certificate, of course, doesn't list the report numbers, rather unusually, I think. But if we go to the next issue of this certificate, we can see that it does. It's BBA 50200. This is another issue of this certificate. It's an amended version. And you can see that from the bottom of page 1, date of first issue, 8th of October 2015. And then it says underneath that, certificate amended 16th of November 2015. So we know that there was an amendment then. If we go to the equivalent behaviour in fire section at the bottom of page 5, again, we can see paragraph 8.2, if you look there, it says there, when tested to BS 8414 Part 1 2002 or BS 8414 Part 2 2005, the specific cladding constructions, including the product described in the test reports referred to in Table 4 of the certificate, met the criteria given in BR Report BR 135 2013 and so are permitted for use above 18 metres by the National Building Regulations. And if you go to the top of page 6, you can see the table that's referred to, Table 4. There it is. And you can see the 3rd test listed in that list is numbered 291642, which was the July 2014 test, yes?
That's correct.
So it looks as if by mid-August 2015, the BBA were being given the July 2014 test and the class report for the low lambda test. And certainly that was the case by the end of November, or mid-November 2015, but not being told that the product being marketed was not the product tested.
That's correct.
Did you see the BBA certificate when it came back to you with this amendment?
I would have looked at the certificate, yes.
Yes. Would you not have noticed that there in Table 4 was the test number for the test report for the July 2014 test?
I didn't make that connection that was that test. I thought that was still a standard test and we could rely on it.
Right.
But that was incorrect.
So we've now got 4 occasions on which you didn't make
Yes.
this connection.
Yes.
Right. Let's go to KIN 402289. This is an email exchange that you had with Richard Smith from MD Insurance Services in April 2016. So this is the next year. And I think we need to start at page 2 to see what it is that you're responding to. And here is an email from him to you on the 18th of April 2016 at 15:40. Meeting between Kingspan and MD Insurance. He says, good afternoon, Adrian. Following our brief catch-up at eco build, I feel it would be useful if we could meet up to further develop our processes of how we deal with high-rise buildings and cladding over 18 metres. You will no doubt be aware that although we apply BCA Guidance Note 18, we seem to be more proactive than other warranty providers than we know. However, perhaps on occasion we can still become unstuck with some of these schemes, particularly where the standard detail has changed, but not significantly. Some of the areas where we require some support are as follows. We would benefit from accessing your database of test results that confirms that the build-up of construction that we are providing a warranty for meets B4 of the building regulations. Now, that's a bit of the background. MD were a warranty provider for high-rise buildings, weren't they? Or an insurer?
MD Insurance.
In insurance, yeah. Now, you respond, if you go to page 1, also on the 18th of April, and you say it was good to catch up, etc. And then you say in the third sentence or third paragraph, we can certainly arrange to have access to our test report data. You can access this. You can access this via this Dropbox link, and then you set him a Dropbox link there, and then you helpfully identify what's in it. And if you look at the third and fourth bullet points down, you can see BS 8414 Part 2, report number 297099. 80mm K15 onto a 12mm cement particle board behind non-combustible cladding, Taylor Maxwell terracotta, and then BR135, report number 291642, based on report 297099. This shows that the system met the performance criteria of BR135. So just pausing there, those were the test reports and the classification report for the July 2014 test, weren't they?
That's correct.
And then underneath that block of bullet points, we can see you say, I have also included our current BBA certificate for reference. Please note the certificate code has changed. To cut a long story short, Mr. Pargeter, you are clearly representing to MD that the July 2014 test could be relied on to support warranties being granted for the use of standard K15 on high-rise buildings, aren't you?
That's correct.
And given that you have accepted that the July 2015 test did not involve standard K15 then being sold and therefore insured by MD potentially, you must have realised at the time that there was a discrepancy in that respect.
No, I didn't. It's the same issue. You know, we've got these test reports. I missed it at the beginning, and because I've missed it then, I've just carried on referring to them in that mistaken belief that it was a standard product, or not appreciating the fact that it wasn't.
Well, there are now, I think, at least 5 occasions when you are actively involved in either identifying or actively representing that the July 2015 test was on standard K15. Are you telling us that on not one single one of those occasions did you stop and just ask yourself, well, hang on, this isn't standard K15, it was an R&D product?
No, I didn't.
Can you explain why that is?
I think it was just moving forward with the test programme. We'd done a second test with the terracotta, we'd done a third test, and I just didn't think about making that connection with that one.
You are head of technical and marketing. That blended role required you, is this right, not only to understand exactly what it was that was being tested, but to ensure that what was being sold was as tested.
That's correct.
And that is the key focus of your job.
One of the focuses of my job, yes.
And you would have it that you fell down in that key focus.
Certainly on that one report, yes, I did.
We're dealing with fire safety. That's the purpose of these tests, isn't it?
Yes.
And so your error, as you must have realised at the time, if you'd made an error, would have had a profound effect on the safety of the use of this material above 18 metres.
I think in hindsight, looking at it, it wouldn't, because we've got other tests and subsequent tests on terracotta that we know was on standard product, and in fact was on thicker product, so potentially a greater fire load from the insulation perspective, which passed. So, that I would have thought that test would also pass with the standard product. So I don't think that error from my point of view created any risk from a fire perspective.
Well, that's an argument based on hindsight, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm looking back at this in hindsight.
And really what I'm asking you to do is to accept at the time that you didn't make such a fundamental error in matters of life safety. This was a deliberate
No, it wasn't deliberate
failure
at
on
all.
your part.
No, it wasn't deliberate failure.
You would have us believe that it was simply carelessness.
I think it was lack of attention to detail. I'd agree with that. And also, if it was deliberate, then I would have understood that test couldn't be relied on. And, for example, once we'd got the second terracotta test, theoretically we didn't need that first test. So had I been doing it at sort of deliberately and, let's say, at risk, if you like, of it not being representative, then we could have just dropped that test immediately we got the second test, because we didn't need it anymore. And we didn't do that because I was unaware of that first test.
Where did your assumption or thought, erroneous as you say it was, that standard K15 had been tested in July 2014 come from?
Just my own assumption.
But you'd always known, as you told us yesterday, in some detail, that the July 2014 test was on a development product.
Yes, that's true. I just
Given
didn't
that
make the connection that was that test.
Well, given that you knew that the July 2014 test was on a development product, what I'm struggling to understand, Mr. Pargeter, is how that knowledge could somehow be converted into an assumption that what had been tested was standard K15.
I just didn't make the connection that they were the same test, and I agree. I should have done.
It's right, isn't it, that there were a number of desktop studies for standard K15 that relied on the July 2014 test, weren't there?
Yes, I would think so.
Yes, and we can just look at an example of one because you give one in your second statement. Can we look at page 79, please, of the second statement, paragraph 9.6a? And this is the desktop study for Putney. There are a number of them in there, but if you go to A, 9.6a, you can see that you refer to a meeting there. And if you go to item 5, Little Roman 5, Kingspan would continue liaising with Exova on the Putney Plaza project and include the NHBC in correspondence. Now let's just look at the Putney Plaza desktop study. It's at KIN 50193, please. It's done by Exova. It's issue 2. It's dated 12th November 2015. And if we go to page 7, and this is a report given to Kingspan, we can see a table with a heading which is supporting documentation, and it says the following reports and drawings have been used in this assessment of the ventilated external wall system, which is proposed for use on high-rise buildings in Putney Plaza development. And there, in the fifth box down, you can see Kingspan K15 phenolic foam insulation. Do you see that?
Yes.
We can see the BBA certificate, and then underneath that, the BRE report 220876, to BS8414 Part 1. That's the 2005 test. And then underneath, two down underneath that, the BRE report 297099 to BS8414 Part 2. That's the July 2014 test, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And then BRE report 218611. But you can see from that clearly that the 297099 test is the July test. And if you go to page 8, there's a bit more. Under point 2 or paragraph 2 there, X over have a heading, BRE test report 297099, a fire test in accordance with BS8414 Part 2, where the facade system is mounted onto a steel structure rather than a masonry wall, was carried out on a Kingspan K15 insulated system with a sheathing board of 12mm cement particles and a ventilated terracotta tile facing. And there is a reference a little lower down to the facing being Taylor Maxwell Argoton Classico. Now, you were clearly aware of this report at the time, weren't you? Because you discussed it in a meeting with the NHBC, didn't you?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Again, is this another occasion on which you just didn't spot the fact that although the report clearly says that the July 2014 test had been carried out on a Kingspan K15 insulated system, in fact, it had been carried out on a research and development system?
That's correct.
There's another occasion on which this point was missed by you.
Yes.
And again, do you explain that that was just another emanation of the same error?
It is, yes.
Right. Just going back to your witness statement, if we can, your third witness statement, please, page 56, paragraph 7.16, which I showed you to start with, fourth line down. When you say, I only made the connection that the test I was involved in from a product development perspective in July 2014 was being used to support the use of standard K15 when it was raised by Insulation UK's solicitors in early 19 during their disclosure exercise for the purposes of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. Now, on all the documents we've seen, I've got to suggest to you that that's simply not true, is it?
It is true. It is true. I just simply wasn't aware that that was that development test.
Well, if it was true, then you must accept that you had radically failed to a fundamental level in your obligations of safety in the role you held.
I certainly regret the fact that I missed that, but I don't think it was a fundamental effect on fire safety, that error. And maybe I didn't look into it any further because we'd got other tests that were on the standard product, which gave me comfort not to look at it into any deeper detail. But I regret that, because that shouldn't have happened on my watch, and it did.
And I want to ask you some questions about Class 0 and K15, so a different topic. And I'd like to take you through the Class 0 testing system, which you say K15 has achieved. Can we go, please, first to your third witness statement at paragraph 3.40 on page 29 at the top there. And you say, as far as it has been possible for Insulation UK solicitors to piece together the chronology, it appears that at the time of transfer to new technology K15 in 2006, reliance was initially placed on BS476 testing undertaken on 2 composite phenolic insulation products produced at Kesteren in order to support the Class 0 and low-risk claim of K15. These products were called DL2000 and DL3300, or 3300. Can I ask you, why is it proved necessary for Kingspan's solicitors to piece together a chronology of Class 0 testing?
Well, it wasn't the solicitors that pieced it together. It was the processing team and my team as well, looking into historic records, which provided the evidence which the solicitors then pieced together. They didn't do the work.
Well, forgive me, but you say, as far as it has been possible for Insulation UK solicitors to piece together the chronology.
Yes.
So is that wrong? And it wasn't.
They didn't piece it together. They put together the pieces that we'd investigated.
I see. On the basis that it was your team that had done the piecing together, does that tell us that Kingspan didn't in fact know what testing it was relying on in 2006 when it made claims about the fire safety of its product to the general public?
I'm not sure I can speak back to 2006, but what we were doing as part of the exercise is to go all the way back and find what test evidence there was within our systems. So the upshot of that is that it looks as though we could only be relying on those, I don't know whether they're products or reports, DL2000 and DL3300, but that's what we could tell from the evidence we'd found.
Does that tell us that Kingspan's records, its testing records, were, to put it neutrally, less than perfect, requiring an exercise of archaeology in order to put them together to understand them?
Yeah, there were files and reports kept in different places on people's personal drives. R&D were keeping records. Whoever was sort of taking testing, processing had got records. There was no overall central database where, going back into 2006, we could find records.
Now, I thought you told us yesterday that one of your first jobs when taking on the role of product development manager was to rearrange the record keeping.
That was in 2014-15, yes.
Indeed.
So records for then are easier to find. But going back to 2006.
I see. So when you took over the role in 2014 and cleaned up the record keeping, you only did it prospectively.
Yeah, going forward, yes.
Right, but didn't put them together historically.
No.
Let's look at the initial reliance on the DL2000 and DL3300 products. Those are numbers in test reports which you've exhibited, I think, to your third witness statement, aren't they?
Yes.
And we can look at them. They are KIN 3022645. And I'll just put them up for you. Put one of them up for you. This is the Warrington Fire Research document for a BS 476 Part 7 test. You see that?
Yes.
And that's one of the tests you're referring to. If you go to paragraph 3.40 of your third statement, you can see there, which we've just looked at, that the products were called DL2000 and DL3300. And you've got a footnote 14, and you've exhibited those test reports. To cut a detailed long story as short as I can, what are DL2000 and DL3300?
I believe they were products manufactured from the Kestron facility.
Right.
So it was from that facility those tests were taken from.
Just focusing on DL3300, I think you do say in your witness statement at paragraph 3.40 that one was manufactured. They were both manufactured at Kestron, were they?
I believe so.
Right. Is DL3300 the same as K15 sold at any time?
I'm not sure exactly if there's any differences between the Kestron and the new technology product, but I know that was all the records we could find at the time that we could possibly have been relying on in that period. So I think it's very similar, but I wouldn't know the differences between them.
Right. How does DL3300, which was produced on a different line in the Netherlands and tested in 2003, allow you to say that new technology, K15, produced at Pembridge from September 2006, was class 0?
Just on the basis that it was a similar product.
Right. But again, it's a different product, isn't it? Similar maybe, but different.
Like I say, I'm not aware of the details. This is back in 2006, so I'm just pulling together out the information that we've been able to find.
Right. And the same with DL 2000. That's not the same as K15, is it? That's sold at any time after 2006.
Again, I think the foam technology is the same, but what I wouldn't be aware of is exactly what the facer was on each of them.
Now, would you accept this, that although DL 3300 and DL 2000 were deemed to be Class 0 products, they weren't representative of what was being sold to customers after 2006?
I'm not sure how close, like I say, how close that they were. But they were just the test reports we could find that could possibly have been relied on to make that claim.
Why would they have been relied on to make that claim?
Because we couldn't find any other evidence.
I see.
At around that time.
So to be clear, you're not saying, are you, that the Class 0 certificates from 2003 on DL 2000 and DL 3300 were reliable Class 0 certificates or Class 0 tests for a K15 sold after 2006?
So the question again, sorry.
You're not saying, are you, that the Class 0 tests done in 2003 on DL 2000 and DL 3300 were reliable Class 0 tests for the purposes of Class 0 sold by Kingspan, K15 sold by Kingspan after 2006?
I can't say that that's exactly what was relied on at the time in the in our literature and going forward, because it was very difficult to piece it together. So I think they possibly could be, but we can't make that connection historically.
Right. Then let's move to May 2007. Can we go back to your third witness statement we're on it actually, page 29, paragraph 3.41. You say, I understand that new technology, K15's Class 0 classification, was subsequently supported by tests undertaken in May 2007 on the foil facer of K15. Now, when new tech K15 was first introduced and marketed in and from 2006, had it passed tests under BS 476 Part 6 or BS 476 Part 7?
I think the Part 7 that it had achieved, but I don't think we found any records for a Part 6 that would have met the Class O criteria on the product.
Right. So is this the case, and I appreciate you were not
Yes.
at Kingspan at the time, is it the case that when it was first launched, or first being sold after 2006, K15 didn't actually have a true Class 0 pass?
I think it's true we can't find any evidence of that. From, like I say, the record keeping was all over the place. So we can't find anything. It doesn't mean to say there wasn't anything, but we can't find it.
Right. So when you say that new tech K15's Class 0 classification was supported by tests undertaken in May 2007, that we don't read that as a reference to corroborated. These are new tests. Is that what you're saying? New tests and a new classification.
So which bit are we looking at again, sorry?
Paragraph 3.41. You say there that the new technology...
Oh, yes, on the foil facer.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Yes, you say it was subsequently supported by tests undertaken in May 2007.
That's correct. We've got reports in May 2007 on the facer for K15.
But you're not saying that they're confirming past tests, are you? Because you don't have the records to say
Yes,
that.
that's correct.
Fine. Now, you then exhibit, as part of your statement, parts 6 and 7 tests from some people called Bodycoat, who were effectively part of Warrington Fire. Is that right?
I think that's who they were before Warrington took them over, or I'm not sure of the history of that, but I've seen Bodycoat reports, but I think it's Warrington.
And as you've said in your statement, the testing was on the foil facer only. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So there was no test of K15 as a composite product, foil facer and foam core?
No, not that we could find.
No. Just help me with this broad question. How could testing of the foil facer alone be representative of the entire rigid board insulation product that you were selling?
Because in the ADB for England and Wales, the definition for Class O on a composite product allows you to test either the surface or the product of a composite product, and K15 is a composite product. So it was belief then and belief now still that you can test the facer, and if it achieves Class O, then that's fine to claim that then for the product in which that facer is a composite with.
Now we're going to come and examine that view or position as you've just described it a little bit later when we look at some documents later in this story.
Yes.
From your knowledge, did that view of ADB, that interpretation of ADB, was that something held within the business when you came to it?
Yes.
Who held that view when you came to it?
So certainly John Garbett, the marketing director, he was under that impression. I think Ivor was under that impression. I think most of the technical team were under that impression that that was an interpretation of ADB, because it's quite, it goes back quite a way, like 2007, if not before, that was feasible. So I know it was generally held view that that was a way to claim Class O from ADB.
A way to claim Class O or Class Naught?
A route, yes.
A route.
Yes.
We'll come back to that answer later on when we look at some of the arguments in a little bit more detail. But it's right, I think, just at this stage, that you're then proceeding to sell composite products on the basis that they are Class Naught, but based only on a test of a part of the product, the foil facer.
On the foil facer, yes, that's correct.
Now, let's go back to the tests that you refer to, May 2007, on the foil facer. These are your exhibit AP3, and let's look at those. KIN 50256, please. And this is the BS 476 Part 7 test done in August 2009, it looks like. And that's the date of the report. If you, that's the Part 7 test. Can we look at the Part 6 test as well, which is KIN 50261? I'm not sure we need them both up at the same time. So let's start with the Part 7 test and just identify, if we can, on that document. It probably doesn't matter what it is that we're looking at. The test sponsor is, in both cases, Kingspan Insulation. Let's stick with the document that's on the screen. This is the Part 6 test. And the general description of the test product is the same in both reports. So let's go to back to 256, KIN 50256, which is the Part 7 test, because there's more in that I want to show you. And go to page 5, please. Now, this is the description of test specimens there. And in the first box, you can see the general description. A perforated reinforced aluminium foil composite, which was tested, stapled to the calcium silicate-based board. You see that?
Yes.
The sponsor of the test has stated that the facing is utilised on products referenced Cool Duct and Cool Therm. So, by foil composite, is it just the facer of the product? That's the foil facer you're referring to?
That was tested.
That was tested?
Yes.
Yes. And then a little bit down the boxes, under the section on the left-hand side, it reads aluminium foil composite in vertical. You see there's a long rectangular box on the left-hand side. Can you see that? Which is in landscape.
Yes, all right.
Aluminium foil composite.
Yes.
And then it says in the top box, coat or top square, coating. Can you see that?
Yes.
And a little bit above that, product reference, it says coated foil.
Yes.
So it's telling you that what's tested, I think, is the aluminium foil composite, where the product is coated foil, which then has a coating of its own. And what we see is the elements of the coated foil.
Yeah, the foil itself, or the facer, is made up of different materials.
Exactly.
And aluminium foil is part of that makeup.
Yes, thank you. Now, if we go over the page to page 6, underneath the text box, there are some notes. And note 1 says, the sponsor of the test has provided this information, but at the specific request of the sponsor, these details have been omitted from the report and are instead held on the confidential file relating to this investigation. And if we go back to see what note 1 refers to, back a page to page 5, you see it says note 1, name of manufacturer. So that's been made confidential.
Yes.
And then if we go back to, can you help us as to who the manufacturer of this coated foil was?
I couldn't be sure, but one of the current manufacturer of the facer is a company called Landtech.
Landtech, right, okay. We see their name elsewhere.
Yes.
Then if we go back up to the top of the text box on page 5, we could see on the left-hand side a box that says coating, and I've shown you that, but let's just look at it in a little bit more detail. Going to the right-hand heading, you can see things like product reference, generic type, name of manufacturer, application rate, stroke thickness, application method, and flame retardant details. And if you look further to the right again into the furthermost box on the right, you can see that all of those topics relating to coating have the text see note 2 below. See that?
Yes.
And then if you look at note 2 below, and the same in fact applies also to foil and glass reinforcement, if you look at note 2 below, it says on page 6, the sponsor of the test was unable to provide this information. And then it goes on, the sponsor has confirmed that some of the components were manufactured by other parties. They've also confirmed that they were not able to obtain from the manufacturers some details that would normally be included in Bodycote Warrington Fire test reports. The description of the specimens given above is therefore not as complete as would normally be the case for descriptions included in Bodycote Warrington Fire test reports, and the description may not fully comply with the requirements of the standard. In all other respects, however, the tests were conducted fully in accordance with the requirements of the standard, and the test results are valid. Now, the same note appears in the same form in the other report for Part 6 that I've shown you very briefly. Do you accept that these reports tell you nothing about the coating other than its physical dimensions and that it's aluminium?
It tells you there's some glass scrim, I think I saw there.
Yeah.
So there's some description of it, but like it said there, not all the full details are provided.
No. So they are either worthless or of very limited use, given the poverty of information given on the face of the certificate.
I think it's to protect, our IP, we work with these pacer suppliers to develop products which work with our products. We don't want to give too much information away in a test report for our competition to potentially see how it's done. So I think that's the reason for withholding some of the information. But then at the end, the requirements of the standard and the tests are still valid.
Yes, but they're not. But the report is not transparent as to precisely what it is that's going into your product.
It's not transparent on the detail or the manufacturer, I agree, but on the makeup and the thickness and the key characteristics, I think it's fairly clear.
Well, looking at note 2, there are some components that you didn't know, I think, and couldn't tell Bodycote, but some components that you did know, but wouldn't tell Bodycote. Is that fair?
I think that's correct. I mean, it's a test that I wasn't involved in, but I think that's fair reading of that document.
So some information was not given to Bodycote in relation to the material they were testing, which, but for commercial sensitivities, could have been given to them.
Yes, I would read into that, yes.
Why is Kingspan, or was Kingspan, testing coated foil?
I think that's that's part of the build-up.
Is the foil on standard K15 as being sold to the public at that time and later coated?
I'm not sure on the exact layers, but I think it's got a layer above the aluminium to stop the aluminium from oxidizing. So that could be what the coated reference is.
Do you know?
No.
Now, we've seen also, if we go back to page 5, that the substrate onto which the foil being tested was stapled was calcium silicate-based board, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, calcium silicate is a non-combustible board, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not a combustible phenolic foam.
No, that's correct.
Did you make any of your customers, or do you know whether Kingspan at this time made any of its customers, or anybody that was likely to rely on the Class 0 certification for K15, aware of the fact that Bodycote Warrington Fire had tested the foil on a non-combustible substrate, as opposed to the phenolic foam forming the rest of the product?
I think we would have claimed that the product got Class O based on its FACER performance. We wouldn't have said necessarily it was based on its FACER performance, but we would have based the claim on the FACER performance. So I'm not sure whether we would have made it explicit to customers that that's how it's tested.
Did you see a document that said that although K15 had been tested to Class 0, in fact, only the foil facer part of K15 as a composite product had been tested to that standard?
Did I see a document?
Did you ever see a document, like a certificate or a report, saying that?
I don't believe so.
No. Now, these reports, and we can use the one on the screen, which is the Part 7 report, as I've shown you, were dated 2009, but the tests were done in 2007, as we can see from page 4. If we just look at page 4, you can see in instruction to test. The test was conducted on 10th of May 2007 at the request of Kingspan Insulation Limited, the sponsor of the test. Do you know why 2 years was allowed to elapse between the test date of May 2007 and the report date of 2009?
I don't. That's a long time.
It is a long time. Did you ever investigate that question?
No. I wasn't around in 2007 to investigate that.
Mr. Chairman, that may be a convenient moment.
Is it?
I'm going to move to a different subtopic, but it's still the same general topic.
Well, if that's a good point,
It is.
we better take advantage of it.
I think so.
Yes, right. We're going to have a short break now, Mr. Pargeter. We'll come back at 25 to 12, please.
Okay.
And please don't discuss your evidence or anything to do with it.
Of course.
We're out of the room. Thank you. Thank you. 25 to 12, then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Pargeter to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Pargeter?
Yes.
Yes, on we go then. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now want to ask you about the testing for Class 0 in May 2011 and then again in May 2012. Now, again, I appreciate that you were not overseeing K15 at that time within Kingspan, but I just want to ask you some of the history. Can we look at your third witness statement, please, at page 29 again, and look at paragraph 3.42 together? You say there, at the time of filing my second witness statement, I understood that new technology K15 had subsequently been tested to BS476 as a composite product and had satisfied the criteria to be classified as both low risk and class 0. This is set out in paragraphs 3.18 to 3.19 and 3.40 of my second witness statement, where I explain that in my role as head of technical and marketing Great Britain in 2016, having asked my team to review the BS476 tests held on file for K15, I understood that the BS476 tests undertaken on 6th May 2011 and 9th May 2012 provided this confirmation. Now, it's that last sentence I want to ask you about. Are you telling the inquiry there that in 2016, in your senior role that you occupied at that point, you relied on or were told you could rely on the BS476 tests from May 2011 and May 2012?
Yes, that was the data we got.
Right. And those were tests on the composite product. And were you told at that stage that you could rely on those tests to show that standard K15 could achieve class 0?
I believe so, yes.
Right. And then you go on at paragraph 3.44, over the page, please, at the top of page 30, to say, since filing my witness statement, my second witness statement, Insulation UK has undertaken further investigations around historic BS476 testing of K15 and its low-risk classification as recorded in its product literature. I set out below the findings of these investigations, which have altered my previous understanding. And then at B, you say, Insulation UK has identified that although the associated test report records the product tested as K15, the BS476 Part 6 test carried out on the 9th of May 2012 was in fact conducted using a research and development version of K15 which had a fire retardant lacquer applied to it. This further detail and understanding was obtained by a review of the standard operating procedure, SOP, where available, for the product tested in each of the BS476 tests listed in, and then you give 3 references. The SOP records the precise composition of the tested product, and it's therefore possible to identify where non-standard product was tested. In their review of test reports in 2016, my team had relied on the reference to K15 in the test report and understood that standard K15 had been tested. Now, first, can you tell us what the reason was why these investigations didn't take place in 2016 before you were briefed, but only after October 2019, when you did your second statement?
We did do some research in 2016, and we looked at the historic evidence, but this was taking back what was in place in 2012. In 2016, we did further testing.
But when you looked at the historic position in 2016, is it that the investigations done at that stage didn't reveal the true composition of the product?
No, that's what I mean. The team looked at the reports, could see that they were on the composite product, and thought that they were applicable to be relied on historically.
Right. It's right, isn't it, that Kingspan have given 3 different versions of the spreadsheet showing the BS476 testing, the most recent being version 3 on the 17th of January this year?
I can't specifically remember that, but
well, the 3...
I'll take your word for that.
sorry to interrupt you. The three spreadsheets are those for which you've provided the references
yes.
in paragraph B.
Yes.
And the first version is the one you refer to there first, KIN 3022310, and that's October 2019. The version 2 was 8th of November 2019, and that's the next reference. And the most recent one is the most recent one in January this year, for which you give that last reference. So it's taken 3 goes, essentially.
Yes.
Right. Can you also confirm to us that the tests done in May 2011 and May 2012 that you refer to were originally in the list of Class 0 tests for K15 that was provided to the inquiry?
I'd have to double check.
Okay, we can do that, but take it from me that is the case. Isn't it right that it was only when you produced your third statement in October 2020, September 2020, that Kingspan told the inquiry that a fire retardant lacquer was used in this test, along with a research and development product?
It's which report, which witness statement is this one? The third one?
The third
Yes,
statement, 18th September 2020, yes.
Yes.
Now, you've said here on the page in front of us that your team had relied upon the fact that the report referred to K15 and therefore believed that the report could be used as a Class 0 classification just by that reference. Is that right?
Yes.
But you now say that that was an error, yes?
Yes.
Are you saying that your team's error was that they didn't look at the SOP records for the May 2012 test?
Yes, that's correct.
Why didn't they look at the SOP?
I think because we understood that it had been, we claimed the 476, and they just found those reports, and thought, oh, there's the evidence for that.
Right.
Without thinking that there would be a difference in it.
Who was it in the team that you refer to who failed to look at the SOP when briefing you in 2016?
I think it might have been Dan Ball would have been looking at that evidence.
Why wouldn't the SOP have been the most obvious thing to look at straight away to identify precisely what it was that had been tested?
I think because it just wasn't suspicious that it was something that it didn't say it was.
Can you explain why it was only on the inquiry's request for a third statement from you that this information has come to light?
Because then the technical team were going away and looking at all of the 476 Part 6 and 7 tests that we got and getting into the detail around each of those tests. And it was then when we started looking at the SOP, we realised that that had got a lacquer on it.
Do you accept that keeping precise and complete records of exactly what is being tested and when is a fundamental part of Kingspan's safety and testing programmes?
I think it should be, yes.
And certainly should have been from the time you took over that aspect of the role in late 2013, early 2014.
Yeah, the record keeping certainly gets better.
Well, yes. And are you saying that in the case of these 2012 Class 0 tests, there are no precise and complete records?
I think we struggled to find them again in a similar way. We had to search around to see where those tests had, to find what we might have relied on historically to find those tests.
Why is that, given that one of your roles on coming into the product development manager role in late 2013 was, or early 14, was to improve the record keeping?
Record keeping of products we were developing going forward,
forward.
Not at the historic test data of current products.
Ivor Meredith told us in his witness statement, it's paragraph 55 of it for those who want to see it, that Kingspan kept meticulous records. Is that wrong?
In certain aspects, I think we did, but not across the board. We didn't.
Is it the case that Kingspan, in fact, has tried to hide its lack of successful Class 0 testing and has only really revealed it to the inquiry by degrees, so that it only really emerged
No, I
6
don't.
weeks or
Don't
so
believe
ago.
that's the case. No.
Right. You don't accept that. Was the research and development product tested to class 0 in May 2011 and again in May 2012 a low lambda version of K15 or a similar development product?
I'm not sure. I think it was only the facer that had got the fire retardant lacquer on it.
Right. So a research and development product of the facer alone.
I believe so. I believe the core was the same.
Why would, do you know why the research and development product of the facer alone was tested and not standard 15 as a composite product in 2011 and 2012?
Because it appears that that particular test was an R&D test on a development of the facer material.
Do you know why Kingspan were testing with fire retardants at all?
I think just to see what effect they have on the fire performance of the product or the facer.
Was that because of the lack of successful class 0 testing on the foil facer to date?
No, I think the facer was able to achieve Class O from 2007. So I think it might have been to see if we could get low risk, but I'm not sure.
Well, you say the facer was able to achieve class 0 from 2007. That is only a reference, isn't it, to the 2009 test reports we've just seen?
Yes.
Yes, I see. Do you know who made the decision to conduct these tests on the foil facer in 2011 and 2012?
I don't.
Did you ever look into that question?
I haven't personally. I don't think we have, no.
Do you agree that anybody looking at the report would be able to see that the coating had a fire retardancy?
No.
You don't agree?
Sorry, I do agree.
You do agree, yes.
Yes.
And would you agree, therefore, that if either you or your team had actually read the reports in 2016, it would have been obvious to you that the test involved a non-standard foam with a fire retardant added to the foil, and therefore should never have been relied on as support for K15 as sold?
I don't think it was a non-standard foam.
Well, forget that part of the question then. Let's try it again. Would you agree with me that if you or your team had read the report, it would have been obvious that the test involved a fire retardant added to the foil, and therefore could never and should never have been relied upon for the sale of standard K15?
Yes, that report should not have been relied on.
Right. Let's then come to 2016, Class 0 testing. We can look at your second statement, please. This is October 2019, page 8. Let's look at paragraph 3.11 together. We see you say there, when the foil facer of K15 as opposed to the product as a whole is tested to BS 476 Part 7, it is classified as Class 1. As regards its contribution to flame spread, test report P100160 to 100221. When the foil facer of K15 is tested to BS 476 Part 6, it achieves a fire propagation of index I1.8 and a sub-index of i 1.7. Test report P100160 1002 Part 2. Meaning that K15 achieves the Class 0 classification, as was defined in ADB. This remained the case until ADB was updated in February 2019, when such classifications were removed. I address Class 0, you say, in detail in my response to inquiry question 16 below. K15 was until 2016 classified as low risk, and from there on was classified as medium risk in Scotland in accordance with the Scottish Technical Handbook as referenced in Annex 2B, Table 2.8, Reaction to Fire. This remained the case until the Scottish Technical Handbook was updated in October 2019, when such classifications were removed. Now, the test reports you refer to here, you exhibit at AP3 and AP4, as we can see from the footnote 5 and 6 at the bottom of the page. Can you see that? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And those are, am I right, both from the BRE, with the Part 7 test being undertaken on the 29th of February 2016, and the Part 6 test being undertaken on the 19th of February 2016?
Yes.
Yes. And let's look at those together. First, can we go to KIN 20827, and this is the BS 476 Part 7 test that you exhibit as AP3, and you can see the date there, 29th of February 2016, with that long report number that I read out to you, issue 1, and you can see that it's a BS 476 Part 7 test, and we can go to page 5, we can see the test date. 10th of February 2016, you can see that. And if we go back a page to page 4, we can see section 2.2, which is the description of sample and test format. And the third box down, you can see sample name stroke reference, samples of the K15, KD, K18 and K17 blank insulation board facer. So this was a sample of the facer of various Kingspan products, including in K15, but not the whole product in each case.
Correct.
And under the sample description, we can see it says Lamtec foil facing, 0.38 millimetres thick, 176 grams per square metre weight per unit area, foil stroke silver colour. And underneath that, description of sample as received perforated reinforced foil with a white fibrous backing. So we've confirmed that the test here is on the foil facer alone. That would K15 being sold in the market.
It was the foil facer that was on the K15 sold in the market.
Right. Why were you testing only the facer separately from the foam or other components of the product, the K15 product?
Because in ADB, that's an allowable route for testing for Class O on a composite product.
I see. And why was the facer 380 microns or 0.38 millimetres thick?
Because that's the overall thickness of the composition of the facer.
Right. Was that the thickness of the foil alone, or did it
No.
include the glass fibre mesh or scrim?
It's the complete composite
It's the complete composite of the...
foil, of the facer.
Right. I see. So you're testing not the surface alone, but you're testing the composite material making up the outer skin.
You're testing the complete facer.
Exactly, which has a number of different parts to it.
Yes.
Which is what counts for its depth.
Its overall thickness with a 25 micron foil element to that.
Right. And what is the white fibrous background, or backing, that's referred to under description of sample?
It's the, I think we call it scrim. It's a glass reinforcement at the back.
And does that normally, on the whole
Yes.
composite product, sit between the foam and the facer?
It's part of the facer makeup.
It's part of the back of the facer where it sticks onto the foam, is that?
Yes.
And presumably there's an adhesive, is there, or a bonding process that bonds this skin with the scrim to the foam, yes?
Yes, as part of the process, it's sort of auto-adhesively bonded to the reacting foam as part of the process.
I see. So are you saying that the whole of the product, comprising the Lamtec foil facing and the fibrous backing, was representative of that same element of the K15 as
product.
sold?
Yes.
Let's go then to the Part 6 test at KIN 30202828. This is the report dated 19th of February. And if we go to page 4, we can see the test dates. Again, top of the page, we can see the objective we can see the bottom of the page, date of test, 18th and 19th February 2016. And again, we can see the same composition. So the questions I asked you in relation to the Part 7 test would also apply to the Part 6 test, would they?
Yes.
So looking at these tests done in 2016, they were not tests on the composite product sold to the market. They were tests on a part of the composite product sold to the market only.
On the facer element.
And the facer element. and the facer element had itself a number of different composite elements, didn't it? As you can see, it has a foil facing and it has a scrim.
Yes.
Fibrous backing, yes?
Yes.
You didn't test the fibrous backing on its own, did you?
No, we don't receive it separated. We receive it from Lantec completely laminated in that form.
So you're testing a composite product, even though it's the outer skin of a bigger composite product.
Yes.
So is it right that K15 as sold to the customer itself never had a Class 0 classification, only part of it, the surface?
That's correct.
I'm going to come back to Class 0 shortly, but can I deviate and ask you about BS 8414 and the question of perforations? Can we go to an email chain at KIN 403894? This is an email chain about the printing of a logo on the standard K15 boards, but the part I want to look at with you is an email from Ivor Meredith at the bottom of page 2 and over to the top of page 3. And if we look at the bottom of page 2 together, this email starts from Ivor Meredith, 23rd June 2014, and we can see who receives it over the page, and one of the recipients is you by copy. Can we see that?
Yes.
And the main recipients are Mark Swift, Malcolm Rochfort, Gwyn Davis and John Garbett. And the subject is K15 unprinted. And it's about a facer switch on K15. And in the last paragraph, Mr. Meredith says this. This is not directly related, however, all copied should be aware of the issue. Perforations. When we first started making K15 in NT technical applications, we were under the impression K15 was only to be perforated on one side, i.e. use the K10 facer. The addition of perforations has shown a marked reduction in performance in the Euro class tests and will obviously change VR and WVT. Furthermore, several cladding system suppliers and frame manufacturers have tested their systems with K15 for rainwater penetration. I have not seen any results for K15 since we've started using perforations on both sides. I did put a request in to revert to perforations on one side only. However, this can be reviewed after the next BS 8414 test, which will occur at the end of the month. And that was, in fact, what happened as the July 2014 test. Now, it's clear by that, isn't it, that the reference to NT is there, NT technical applications. You must have been aware when reading that at the very latest that there was new technology K15 being used by that date.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Could you just help us? What is VR and WVT that he refers to in the fourth line there?
I'm not sure of VR. I think the other one is moisture vapor transfer, water vapor transfer.
Water vapor transfer, right. Did you understand this email as telling you that where the foil on K15 boards was perforated on both sides, it would perform less well in fire tests? In fact, it says just that, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. And given the date of this email, 23rd of June 2014, as I said to you, or put to you a moment ago, the next BS 8414 test would be the one in July 2014, which was the 7th July test, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And that test was done using perforated and unperforated 50 micron foil, wasn't it?
Yes.
We can go back to the schedule if you'd like, at KIN.
I think that's correct.
30222357, but you accept that. Now, as we know, that test passed BS 8414 using a product which does not have perforations on both sides. So when you saw the results of the July 2014 BS 8414 test, did you think that one of the reasons it may have passed was because the foil in that test only had perforations on one side, not both?
No.
Why is that?
Because, like I said, I think yesterday, that at that scale, the perforations just won't have an effect. At the scale there, the Euroclass scale, which is where he says there's a difference, I can understand why at that scale you might see a difference in the performance.
Yeah, indeed. But as you can see, of course, this, as you've accepted, is a communication before that test. And my question is, when you saw the results of the July 2014 test, did you not think that one of the reasons that it might have passed was because the foil only had perforations on one side as opposed to both?
No.
And although you are right to say that the addition of perforation shows a marked reduction in the Euroclass tests, which are not 8414 tests, as you say, why not? Why would it not occur to you that one of the reasons why the test under 8414 had passed was because the perforations weren't on both sides?
Simply because of the demand from the fire from the test is so much greater in an 8414 test than it is in an SBI test, that the facer element offers, just like I said yesterday, no protection to the product in that type of test where you can get in excess of 1,000 degrees. An SBI test, there are two parts to an SBI test, and there's the FIGRA, so the fire index, and then there's heat release. And the figure is measured in just the first 15 seconds of the test. So the facer in that element of the test can have a more marked impact on the performance than it would in a test done at 8414.
So was it your view at the time that Ivor Meredith was wrong to raise the question of perforations, given that your view at the time, was it that perforations, one side or the other side, was irrelevant in an 8414 test?
Was he wrong to raise it?
Well,
I don't think he was wrong to raise it, but I don't think logically it could have an effect.
was that your view at the time or now?
Definitely now. Back at 2014, I think I would, yes, I would have had that view based on just that same logic of an 8414 test.
If that was so, Mr. Pargeter, why didn't you respond to this august group? And this is these are senior people, many of whom are from technical, including Tony Millichap, and say to Ivor Meredith, Ivor, I don't understand this perforations question because they're irrelevant in an 8414 test, whatever you may think of performance in a Euroclass test.
I just didn't. I was CC'd in. I didn't.
Right.
I didn't think to respond to it.
I've got to suggest to you that what you're telling us may be your view now, but it was not your view at the time.
I can't recall exactly what my view at the time was.
Well, had you disagreed with it and had the view you hold now, or tell us you espouse, you would have gone back to him and said, you're leading us down the garden path. Perforations are irrelevant when it comes to an 8414 test.
I would possibly do now, yes.
Now, I'd like to take you in a little bit more detail through the question of testing the facer alone, going back to class 0. And if we can go first to your second witness statement, please, at page 9. The best place to start with this, I think, is at paragraph 3.14. And this relates to an inquiry question, 1E, purpose or intended use. And you say there, under inquiry question not numbered, if your understanding as to any of the above has significantly changed at any stage, please explain how and when this change in understanding came about. And at 3.15 you say, as noted in paragraph 3.11 above, K15 was, until October 2019, classified as medium risk in Scotland. Prior to the 10th issue of K15's product literature issued in July 2016, K15 was said to be a low-risk product.
Yes.
Now, just pausing there, you say that K15 was classified as low risk in Scotland until July 2016, when it was described as medium risk. My question is, did your marketing literature spell out that change in 2016 from low to medium?
No, I think we just dropped the low risk element.
Yeah. You just dropped the low risk element and said nothing at all about risk,
Yes, that's correct.
at least for a period.
Yes, for a period.
Yes, we'll look at the documents on that. Is that because K15 couldn't achieve a low-risk classification in Scotland, so it was removed from your marketing literature?
That's correct.
Now, am I also right in saying that you didn't do anything positive to tell your market of that fact, and didn't in fact expressly say that the product was medium risk until 2019, after the Grenfell Tower fire?
That's correct.
Now, at the bottom of page 9, you say and explain the low risk in Scotland, and at 3.16 you set out the Scottish Technical Handbook definition, and you say, by way of background, the Scottish Technical Handbook is referenced in Annex 2B, Table 2.8, Reaction to Fire, prior to 2019 update, defined a low-risk product to be a product where, quotes, the surface material, or where it is bonded throughout to a substrate, the surface material combined with the substrate, has a surface of class 1, and when tested in accordance with BS 476 Part 6, 1981, or BS 476 Part 6, 1989, has an index of performance I not more than 12, and a sub-index II not more than 6. And in the next paragraph you say, this therefore requires that the whole composite product is tested and must achieve the requisite fire propagation index results. This differs, you say, from the requirements of the 2006 edition of ADB in England and Wales, which requires that either the product or, and then you've underlined these words, the surface material of a composite product achieve the necessary fire propagation index results. Thus, the definition of low risk includes the surface material and bonded substrate, while the Class 0 standard tests either the whole product or the surface of the material. Now, you've set out there an understanding. Was that really how you understood Approved Document B from the time you became Product Development Manager at the end of 2013?
No, it was when I became in the technical role, when we started to look at Class O.
So May 2015?
Yes.
Right.
From then on.
But is that really how you understood it?
Yes.
So, to take an extreme example, if the foil facer was bonded to a substrate made of dynamite, you thought that the composite product would still pass Class 0 if the foil facer passed?
No, I wouldn't have thought that.
Why not?
Because in part 6, there's a table there which says if it's attached to an insulation element, so you couldn't do it to a piece of dynamite.
So, but if you're testing your foil alone, your facer alone, without the substrate to which it's attached, how do you know how it will perform under Class 0 unless you test the whole product?
You know the facing material of the product will achieve Class 0.
And that's why I asked the question.
Which is the requirement.
Was it your understanding? Was it really your understanding that it was completely irrelevant what you attached the foil facer to?
I suppose technically yes, but in reality no.
Technically yes, and in reality no is a difference. So let's just see if we can understand that. Technically yes, do you mean on a strict, literal reading of ADB?
Yes.
But in reality you mean on a common sense reading of ADB?
Yes.
Yes. So on your technical reading of ADB, you could staple the foil facer to dynamite and put it on a building above 18 metres and call it Class 0.
No, because you wouldn't have a classification of Class 0 applied to a stick of dynamite. It wouldn't be a requirement.
Well, if it's irrelevant what sits underneath your foil facer, it doesn't matter whether it's brick,
That's why I
or
say
whether it's
technically,
foam,
but
or whether it's
Just let
dynamite.
council finish.
sorry. That's why I say technically,
Yeah.
but not in reality, because those types of products won't have a classification of class 0, class 0.
And so do we take it from that actually what Kingspan were doing with your adoption of the view was pursuing a technical interpretation of ADB, but not an in reality or common sense interpretation of ADB?
I think it's a technical interpretation, but it's on an insulation product, so it's a common sense approach as well.
If you test the facer,
Yes.
I can see that you might be justified in describing the facer or the surface of the product as having a class 0 or being of class 0 category, but not the product if you're talking about the combined material. Would that be fair?
I think under ADB, the definition, you can have your composite product by the surface of that composite product.
You mean you think ADB allows you to describe the whole product, the insulation, let's say, which
Yes.
is the real guts of it,
Yes.
as having a class 0 classification,
Sorry.
just because the foil facer
I
can be
believe so.
tested in accordance with class 0?
I believe
Seems
so.
very sensible, does it?
Just the way it's written, I think.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, just the way it's written. So that's why I'm asking you whether Kingspan was pursuing a deliberate policy of approaching the testing on just the way it's written, as opposed to taking a common sense, in reality approach to it.
No, I think it was both. It was part of the definition, which was different for Class O than it is for low risk.
And let's just look at that a little bit more closely. Did you at any stage read the actual test standards for BS 476 Part 6 or Part 7 in arriving at this particular interpretation of the test requirements?
Not the test standards, just ADB.
Right. Well, let's just look at those. Before I do, can I ask you, why didn't you look at the test standards and only content yourself with ADB?
Because the team who were doing the testing were far more familiar with the standards than I was. So
Did it not occur to you to ask yourself the question, well, how can this be? How can we get away legitimately by calling a composite product class 0 by only testing the foil facer? Did that question not occur to you?
only by the interpretation in ADB.
Yes, and having seen ADB, did it not occur to you, this cannot be right, or this is an interesting interpretation? I wonder what the test standards actually require. Did that question not occur to you?
No, I thought it was an alternative interpretation, but I didn't think the test standards would have any bearing on that.
Did you ask any member of your technical team from latest May 2015, when you took on the technical role, to go and look at the test standards and just double check whether the test standards themselves supported this interpretation, technical interpretation of ADB?
No.
Can we look at the test standards? This is BRE 405557, which is the test standard BS 476 Part 6. Is this a document familiar to you at all, even today?
Yes.
It is. When did you first become familiar with this document?
Probably a year ago, maybe.
Right. So not during your tenure. Well, I suppose you're still head of technical, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
But not at any time prior to the fire, and not
No.
at any time
No.
before you did your first or indeed second witness statements.
No. Correct.
Let's look at page 18, please. Page 18, which is Appendix B. And on the left-hand side of the page, we can see Appendix B, effect of thermal characteristics on the performance of assemblies. With thin materials, it says, with thin materials or composites, particularly those with high thermal conductivity, the presence of an air gap and the nature of any underlying construction may significantly affect the ignition performance of the exposed surface. Increasing the thermal capacity of the underlying construction increases the heat sink effect and may delay ignition of the exposed surface. Any backing provided to the test specimen and in intimate contact with it, such as the non-combustible packing pieces, may alter this heat sink effect and may be fundamental to the test result itself. The influence of the underlying layers on the performance of the assembly should be understood, and care should be taken to ensure that the result obtained on any assembly is relevant to its use in practice. And then I'll just finish off some reading of the rest of this I want to show you. In the right-hand column, it says the following advice is offered on the construction and preparation of test specimens. And then I think if you look at C and D, you will see this. Where the product is to be used over a low-density non-combustible substrate, and the characteristics noted in A do not apply, which is about thermal properties, then the product should be tested in conjunction with that substrate. Where the product is to be used over a combustible substrate and the characteristics noted in A do not apply, then the product should be tested in conjunction with that substrate. Now, is it right that the result obtained from a test on a piece of foil facer stapled to a non-combustible calcium silicate board is not even vaguely relevant to the use in practice of that foil facer against a combustible phenolic foam, is it?
So if we look at D, where the product is to be used over a combustible substrate and the characteristics noted in A do not apply, then the product should be tested in conjunction with that substrate. But in A, they do apply.
They do they? Was that part of the thinking at the time? Did somebody go through this and say, well, A is disapplied, so I don't have to test it over the substrate?
I can't say it was ever pointed out to me.
No. So that's an argument. Going back to the left-hand column, where a warning about composites is set out, the influence of the underlying layers on the performance of the assembly should be understood, etc. By testing the foil facer alone, you would not be taking the care that it was required to make sure that the underlying substrate had no effect on the test, for good or ill.
Like I say, D applies, and so with D and A not applying, you have to test it on the apparatus backing, which is then the calcium silicate board.
Tell me, you did full product low risk tests for sale in Scotland, didn't you? Because this interpretation that you espouse in relation to testing the foil facer only doesn't apply in Scotland.
That's correct.
So did you do full product low risk tests for sale of K15 in Scotland?
Historically, yes, but we couldn't achieve that requirement with the facer on it.
No. And do I take it from that by 2016 you were aware, whatever the interpretation might allow you to do in England, you couldn't pass the relevant test for low risk for sale in Scotland?
Yes, that's why we changed.
Did you continue to sell K15 in Scotland?
We dropped the low risk calling, but we still still
without saying what risk it was?
Not directly, no.
Knowing that you hadn't passed a low risk test?
Well, we weren't claiming low risk.
No.
So.
No, but you knew that K15 could not pass and had never passed a low risk test for use in Scotland, and yet you were continuing to sell K15 in Scotland.
but not as low risk.
Well, there's nothing. You didn't describe it one way or the other, did you?
No, not to start with.
Did
No.
that not strike you at the time as remarkably reckless?
No. I thought we checked the testing. We couldn't apply it. I wasn't prepared to claim it if we couldn't get the result for it. So we dropped the low risk classification from it.
Let's look at an email chain from June 2016, where we can see that you discussed this topic with your technical team. And we'll start with KIN 4168, please, and go to page 7. It's a long email chain, and I'd like to show you the third email up from Reshma Ruderman to you on the 22nd of June 2016. Now, just help me. Reshma Ruderman had what role at Kingspan?
She was in the marketing team.
Marketing team. And she reported to you, did she? By this stage, because since you were head of marketing, she must have done.
Yes.
Yeah. And she says, although Kingspan Cool Therm K15 rain screen board and its rigid thermoset insulation core are class 0. Hi, Adrian. Please can you confirm whether we are still running with the above phrase as regards to stating that both the product and its core are class 0? Thanks, R. You see that?
Yes.
Now, this is June 2016. Do you know what had happened for Kingspan to consider changing its marketing material in this respect, or at this point?
I suspect Reshma may have had discussions with the technical team, maybe with Aaron or Dan, and come to the view that the current testing wouldn't support that claim. So she's flagged that then to me.
What had led to that? What had led to, or rather, what discussions or investigations within the technical team had led to the view that the current testing wouldn't support a claim to class 0?
I can't recall directly, but it may have been a review of the literature.
What had caused that?
I can't recall at the time.
You really can't. You were head of technical by this stage.
Yeah.
You've been in that role about a year or
Yeah.
more. You can't remember.
No, I can't remember exactly what triggered it off.
If we go up the chain to the next email, we can see, I'm afraid you've got to go to the bottom of page 6 for it, that it's an email from Aaron Chalmers to Dan Ball, copied to you the same day in response. And he says, Dan, can you confirm, mate, that we should remove the section about the core achieving class 0? I remember you saying that solely the core was having issues achieving class 0. I think you said class 2 in some rare instances. Not that it's an issue, because you can claim, in bold and underlined, you can claim the product as a whole is class 0 if the facing of the product has achieved this, which K15 Lamtech faced has. See below. And then he sets out the paragraph that I think you're referring to from ADB. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that is Appendix A, paragraph 13, which says the highest national product for performance classification for lining materials is class 0. This is achieved if a material, and then he's highlighted the words, or the surface of a composite product is either composed throughout of materials of limited combustibility, or B, a class 1 material which has a fire propagation index I of not more than 12 and subindex I1 of not more than 6. Note, class 0 is not a classification identified in any British standard test. Can you confirm that this is the bit of ADB that you were referring to when you were explaining just now your view of the interpretation?
Yes.
That's it, is it? Right. When he came up with this or told you this, were you not extremely concerned to hear that in some cases the core of K15 was achieving class 2? If we go back to the previous page, you can see where he says that.
Yeah, I think he said on rare occasions. So obviously, it wasn't a consistent problem, but it's not a consistent test. It's a quite inconsistent test, if you like. It's a very old standard, so we would see fluctuations.
Right. So it didn't bother you?
Report. It didn't overly concern me at that point,
Right.
no.
What about him saying that the core was having, as he put it, issues achieving class 0? Did that bother you or not?
No, because really the core achieving class O is not that relevant. We claimed it on the core historically.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what the relevance of claiming it on the core was historically.
Well, was that a view at the time that you thought, well, it doesn't matter what the core does?
No, it wasn't that it didn't matter. It wasn't a concern, an over concern.
Were you aware, before Aaron Chalmers wrote this email, that K15's core was having, as he put it, issues achieving class 0, and on some occasions, rare occasions, only met class 2?
No, I think it was at this point that it was starting to be flagged when Reshma picked it up.
Right. Now, let's scroll up, and we can see that the next email is from you to him in response. A copy to others, including Reshma Ruderman. Guys, the decision was made today to remove the reference to class 0 because I was advised that neither the core or the film will conform to class 0. It will be potentially damaging to remove it, but not prepared to say we pass if we don't. So which is it? Does the facer pass or not? Now, you say the decision was made today. Who made that decision?
Myself initially in discussions with Reshma, I think that she felt we hadn't got the evidence to keep the claim for Class O. So I said, well, if we haven't got the evidence, then we'll stop claiming it.
Right. But you and Reshma Ruderman?
Yes.
Was that in a meeting or an email
No, I think it might have been in a meeting because we were
right
in the same room.
We've seen no record of that decision, a written record of that decision.
No, I think that's probably the only record.
Who advised you that neither the core nor the film would conform to class 0?
I think it was Reshma after she'd been talking to. That was her interpretation after I'd been talking to the technical team.
So it's not just the core you're being told about. It's the film as well.
Yes, we're under that interpretation. Yeah.
Right. So when you say film, do you mean the
facer.
foil facer?
Yes.
Now, what test was that a reference to?
I don't think it was a reference to a test. I think it was just reference to a discussion that Reshma had.
Right. What was the basis of her belief that she was communicating to you that the film would not conform to class 0?
I don't know, because that actually wasn't correct. That the facer wouldn't pass, but it was definitely the impression she had got.
Why do you ask her at the end of your message here, does the facer pass or not?
I'm not asking Reshma. I'm asking the technical team, Aaron and Dan. So this is to them in response to Reshma's discussion with me.
I see. So you were told by Reshma that neither the core nor the film would pass. But is it right that you didn't understand why it was being said the film wouldn't pass? Because so far as you were concerned, it had. Is that what we take from this?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of why it wouldn't, so that's why I put that to the team to let me know does it or doesn't it.
Right. Now, if as you said you knew the core in some cases achieved class 2, how could you possibly contemplate a class 0 rating for a product based on the classification of the facer alone? Or is the answer to that question your interpretation point?
Yes, it's the interpretation point.
Right. So when you sent this email, this message at 17:47, you had Mr. Chalmers's message back to you with the quotation from Appendix A of ADB for about 4 hours that afternoon, hadn't you?
Yes.
Between receiving his message and sending this message to Aaron Chalmers back again, did you investigate for yourself the Appendix A point and examine the wording and have a think about it?
No, I was probably busy doing other things, so I sent that to the team to look at. I'm far more experienced in the testing to 476 than I was, so I forwarded it to the team.
When you sent this message back to Aaron Chalmers and Dan Ball, did you really think that the meaning which Aaron Chalmers was teasing out of or extracting from the language of Appendix A he was sending you was really the intended meaning?
It was the literal interpretation from my perspective.
But did you think it was the intended meaning?
I don't think I just considered the intended meaning. I think it was just a literal interpretation of it.
Right. So you didn't stop and ask yourself, well, although I think it literally says this, it can't possibly mean this. You didn't stop and have those thoughts?
No.
And is that because you saw this literal interpretation as a useful tool?
Yeah, it obviously it had been relied on previously, and I thought it was a legitimate interpretation.
You thought it would have been relied on previously by whom?
By Kingspan.
And you thought it was a legitimate interpretation even though you didn't consider whether it was an intended interpretation?
Yes.
Further up the chain, we can see the same day, Dan Ball responds to you. And I'm afraid you'll have to go back over to page 5 for this email, but it's quite a long one. And it comes to you in the first instance, and actually it ends with a question, what do you think? Aid. So this is directly asked of you by Dan Ball, same day, just after 8 o'clock that evening. And the email comes to you and Mohammed Asif Irfan. Who is Mohammed Asif Irfan?
He was somebody we'd taken on who was doing a master's in fire performance.
Right. And it's copied to Adrian Brazier and Reshma Ruderman. And he says, who told you that, Aid? Core, that's correct, but not facing. That's a true statement for K7, K12, K8, K108. But the LamTech 25 micron, I've done both tests recently on perf and non-perf, and have class 0 summary reports on both 25 micron LamTechs. Mo, what was the result on the black 18 micron LamTech that you tested a couple of months ago? I know the BRE are slow, but it's a couple of months ago that you sent it them now, isn't it? Possibly longer. BRE are better, but they're so slow, aren't they? And then he says, if you haven't heard, Sheila should be able to tell you over the phone. If we can get the summary report on that, as well as the ones I have on the 25 micron, anything with those facings we can state a class 0 or state a class 0 facing to the product. The section in Part B does state you can claim they are class 0 because of the facing stroke composite layer. We don't have to say it's because of the facing if we don't want to, but of course that's a choice. Did you understand Mr. Ball from that to be suggesting that you could choose to decide to claim class 0 for a product based on a class 0 test on the facer alone, and then not reveal that the test was on the facer only?
Yes, I think that's what he's saying there.
And then if we follow on with that to see what happens next, if we go up page 5, just above Dan Ball's email, this is now the next day, early in the morning, 8:40, 23rd of June 2016. Reshma Ruderman writes to Dan Ball and you and Mo, copied to Adrian Brazier, and there's a series of bullet points. And the third bullet point is in bold. Sorry, I should show you the second bullet point. Based on the facer facilitating a class 0 England and Wales, and to be technically correct, the statement I've run with is Kingspan Cooltherm K15 range screen board is class 0 as defined by the building regulations. Without the class naught, we'd have no product for that application, she says in the next bullet point. And then she goes on to say, if in the future the core achieves class naught, that should be, all by itself, then we will revert to the following statement. Kingspan Cool 15 K15 rain screen board and its rigid phenolic insulation core is class naught stroke low risk as defined by the building regulations stroke standards. What did you make of that message as head of technical and marketing?
I thought it was an accurate way to describe the performance of the product, the difference between the building regs and the Scottish standards.
It didn't occur to you that that was an utterly disingenuous and opportunistic interpretation?
No.
No. But it's right, isn't it? Well, actually, is it right? Is it right that you would have no product without class naught?
No, I don't think so.
No. But over the 18-metre market, in the over 18-metre market, you wouldn't be able to use this without class naught, would you?
No, for the insulation, the class naught elements not relevant. It's relevant for the cladding.
Yeah, that's a different
material.
Question.
Yes.
Whatever you would need class naught for above 18 metres, not as part of the cladding, I understand that. You would still need class naught over 18 metres. It does have an application over 18 metres, doesn't it?
Not for the insulation.
Well, we can argue about that till the cows come home. Didn't you think at the time that testing the facer alone and then claiming class naught for Kingspan K15 as a product was misleading?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because it was an interpretation of ADB.
How would any buyer of K15 know that you had adopted that interpretation and tested to class naught only the foil facer and not the entire product?
Only by defining it as defined by the building regulations.
You think that was it, was it? Those words, as defined by the building regulations?
That would be it, yes.
Did you really honestly think at the time that by using those words you were signalling in clear terms to a buyer of K15 that you'd only tested the foil facer and not the entire composite product?
No, I don't think I would.
No. So any buyer of K15 being told it was class naught would not know, would they, that they were buying a product in respect of which only the foil facer had passed a class naught product?
No, but they've been
Test.
They know that a product was class naught by the definition of the building regulations.
So was it really your thinking at the time that a buyer of K15 would look at your class naught designation and work out that you'd only tested the foil facer by reference or cross-reference to paragraph 13 of Appendix A of approved document B?
No, they would just need to know that it was correctly described as Class O.
Had you any reason to think that the entire market shared the interpretation of approved document B that Aaron Chalmers had come up with early in the afternoon of the 22nd of June 2016?
Are there any reason to believe
That the market shared Aaron Chalmers' interpretation of the building regulations that he'd come up with or identified early in the afternoon of the 22nd of June 2016?
I'm not sure whether the market, what other people were doing with their Class O testing in response to ADB.
I mean, put it this way, you weren't aware, were you, at the time, of a generally held view that the interpretation of the of ADB, which Aaron Chalmers was putting forward, was one widely shared in the market?
No, I wouldn't.
Moving up, we can see what happens next. Second email down on the page 5, Dan Ball to Reshma Rudaran and to you and to Mo Asif Irfan and to Adrian Pargeter and Adam Heath. That first statement of yours is perfect, Resh, and should always stay like that. We shouldn't revert to the second one as it's not referring to the product as placed on the market. That first statement of yours is spot on. You see that?
Yes.
And if we then go to the next email up, this is from Mohammed Asif Irfan, and it starts at the bottom of page 4. and goes to the top of page 5, he says that he's tested a black Lamtech 18-metre facing and achieved class 0. I'm paraphrasing what he says there. And then he says underneath the fire propagation index and sub-indices, since the fire propagation is well below 6, the facer is clearly a class 0 product. And he then says underneath that, now the only question I have with regards to getting the entire K15 40mm product tested is there any point in doing that? ADB Vol 2 clearly states that as long as the surface of the product is class 0, the entire product can be stated to be class 0. I'm sure we can allocate those fines to other testing. So that's what he says. And if we go further up, page 4 to Dan Ball's email above that, on the 23rd of June, copied to you at 12:57, this is on page 4, thank you. This is Dan Ball. He says, we don't have to test the product as a whole to get class 0, quite right, and we can claim it legitimately now. We would just be interesting to see if there's any difference between testing facing and product as placed on the market. Be good to see if that K7 got a class 1, at least we claim. But as we got a Euro class F, it would be a surprise. That's good about the black Lamtech. Now it seems, looking at these 3 emails, that what's going on here, and is this right, is that your team, with you looking on, knew that they couldn't achieve class 0 for K15 as a product, as a composite product, but could get class 0 for the foil facer, but then suggest that K15 can be marketed as a class 0 product based only on the foil being class 0.
Correct.
Yes. But the legitimacy of that approach rested on a particular interpretation of paragraph 13 of Appendix A that we'd seen earlier in the emails.
Yes.
And you knew of no widespread adoption of that in the industry, as you've told us. Did you know at the time of any of your competitors honestly adopting that interpretation?
No, I don't think so.
So from your perspective, you would have understood that this interpretation was entirely novel.
No, I mean, it was a plain potential interpretation. So they could have been, but I wasn't aware whether they were or not.
Did you stop to consider how such an interpretation could possibly make any sense?
In terms of that particular test, one of the problems with that test, when you're trying to test a composite product, particularly with a foil facer, is the facer itself can delaminate from the product and then touch the burner element and affect the test. So it's quite an unreliable type test for insulation materials. It was really, as I believe, designed for internal linings, so more plasterboard type products. And so I think based on that experience, then to take that element out of the test and just test the facer gives you a more reliable result on the test than it would with just the facer delaminating and affecting the burner.
What I would suggest to you that these emails show thus far is the evolution over some 2 days in June 2016 of a plan to sell K15 on the basis of a claim that it was a Class 0 product, knowing that only the surface could be described as such, and then to justify that statement by reference to a novel and unverified meaning of ADB that you had not verified outside the business. Do you accept that as a fair summary of what was going on here?
I don't think it was a novel interpretation. The business had used that interpretation for quite some time, so it wasn't novel to Kingspan. Whether it was novel in terms of competition, I wouldn't know.
Well, you see, this is about life safety, isn't it? Class 0 is about saving lives, ultimately, isn't it?
Well, it's about small-scale fire performance.
Yes, but the point of doing the tests is to make sure that there aren't fires in which people are either injured or die or lose their property.
Potentially, yes.
Well, you seem to be having trouble with that proposition. Let's take a step back. approved document B, and
Yes,
indeed Part B of the building regulations is about fire, isn't it?
that's correct.
And the reason why constructions are regulated, and I'm sorry if it sounds patronising, but I just want to be sure you really are grasping this, is so as to stop buildings being dangerous.
That's correct.
Yeah, and the Class 0 test was part of that regime.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was not potentially part of life safety, it was actually an important element in construction regulation to protect lives.
Yes.
Yes. And yet here you are deciding to adopt an interpretation of the guidance in approved document B, which was literal and which you had no reason to believe was shared in the industry either by buyers or your competitors. Yes?
Correct.
Was that not an extremely dangerous thing for you to do?
No, I don't think it was. I think because of, like I say, the test, it's difficult to test an insulation material with a facer because it delaminates, and so I think it was a fair interpretation of it to test the facer, which is what would come in contact with the actual fire.
If it was a fair interpretation, why not simply say in your marketing literature and in the relevant certificates under which it was sold that the foil facer had achieved Class 0?
I would agree that would be clearer.
Well, it wouldn't just be clearer. I would suggest to you that the reason you didn't do that was because you knew very well that that would immediately provoke questions as to whether K15 had passed the Class 0 test. And you couldn't answer that question with the answer yes, could you?
You could, because you could have reverted to the standard. So we could have described it that way and reverted to the standard and its description.
And by selling Kingspan K15, having passed only a Class 0 test successfully in relation to the foil, you were misleading and deliberately misleading the market.
No, I don't agree with that.
And that anybody who read the Class 0 certificate for Kingspan K15 was not told that it didn't apply to the whole product, but only a part of it. And they would have no means of knowing that. Do you not accept that?
If somebody had have asked for the Class O test, we'd have provided them with the facer test.
So you were prepared to say that the product passed Class 0, but when asked would reveal the truth. Is that how it worked?
We'd we would provide the test report to substantiate that interpretation.
So this is a thoroughly dishonest and disingenuous way of carrying on business, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is.
And it's playing fast and loose with life safety regulation.
No, not at all.
Now, let's look at a few more of these emails in this run. I'm going to paraphrase the next few, but if we go up from page 4 to page 3 and then run up page 3, you can see what happens. And I'm going to summarise it, and I hope accurately, but tell me if this is wrong. Effectively, Reshma Ruderman asks what should be written for the classification for the Scottish market, and Dan Ball is keen to test the core of K15. And if we go to Aaron Chalmers' email in the middle of page 3 there, he says on the 23rd of June, I didn't see any issues with stating that Cooltherm K15, K10, K9 is designated as low risk in accordance with the Scottish Technical Handbook as, and then he says, Section 2E1, it states the designer is free to choose a product that satisfies a BS test or a European one until such time as the BS classifications are withdrawn. Low-risk materials are designated as such should the surface material basically achieve Class 0 as highlighted in ADB 2. We don't achieve a B to Euro class, which does muddy the water slightly, but it does state you're free to choose a product that satisfies either, not necessarily both. Can you explain what Aaron Chalmers is saying here?
No, it doesn't make sense to me.
No, and you were copied in on that email. Did you go back to him and say, I'm sorry, Aaron, I can't understand what you're talking about. Could you just explain? We don't see that happen.
No, I don't think so.
No, why is that?
I think I was just looking to see what the rest of the team would say on that.
Right.
I think my view was the standard, the technical handbook interpretation was different.
Right. And then we go up an email, up one to Dan Ball's email to Aaron Chalmers. Again, you're copied it. I agree with Aaron. If we can show it's class 0, and in the meantime get 40mm K15 tested and see what occurs. The only reason it would fail when the facing passes is if pentane release through the perforations causes a fail, but I'm optimistic. And just on that point, that rather undermines, doesn't it, the argument you come up with that actually the perforations wouldn't have made any difference in an 8414 test, because actually they would have made a difference in this test.
No, I think it still supports that argument because this is a very small scale test and a very small product with a very low fire output.
And if we go to the email from Aaron Chalmers at the bottom of page 2, same day, 23rd June 2016 at 17:58, he says, and again you're copied, right, all agreed, it's definitely class 0. So include the product as class 0 in the document. I'll email Franz Papp and gauge his views on whether we can claim low risk at present without a full product test. If so, we'll have to leave that bit out for the time being and just add it as an update in the future. Dan Ball comes back and says, agreed, mate, send him a smoke density at the same time, etc. I can't get them here at the moment. I can't get them at them here just to see if he can say it's low or not. If he doesn't know, no one will, and we can just remove the old statement. And then Dan Ball's response sorry, I'm jumping ahead. If we go to Aaron Chalmers' response up the chain at 27th of June at 10:03, I think you need to go to page 1 for that. He says at the bottom of the page 1, again you're copied, Franz has said that smoke density figure of around 100 is low, etc., etc. And then if we go over the page to page 2, he says, under the text box there, with regards to class 0 low risk, he believes that we should test the complete product before we can claim anything, as the foam behind the foil is likely to have a bearing on the facing performance. There it is in black and white from Franz Papp, a fire engineer at Ixova, that for classification to either class 0 or low risk, the complete composite product should be tested. And he gives a reason. The foam behind the foil has a bearing on the facer performance. At the time, did that not strike you as the correct advice? And obviously so.
No, I think because higher up he said it's a valid interpretation, but not one that he would take, but thought was an interpretation.
Never mind interpretation. We'll come to show you the full run. I assure you of that. But just looking at the advice that Aaron Chalmers is passing on to you that he got from Franz Papp at Ixova, the foam behind the foil is likely to have a bearing on the facing performance. You had no reason to disagree with that as a matter of science, did you?
No.
No. Was that not a good point to jump into this chain and tell those in the technical department that they should stop trying to come up with clever ways through ADB and just test the whole product to class 0, as Ixova had advised?
Potentially, but I took the view we could still take the interpretation from ADB.
Right. Against the advice from an independent fire engineer at Ixova.
But Franz Papp also says it is a valid interpretation as well.
Yes, we're going to come to that in just a moment. I'm just on the advice that you get at this point. You see that Franz Papp is telling you that you should test the complete product before you can claim anything, because the foam behind the foil is likely to have a bearing on the facing performance. You've told us that there's no scientific reason to dispute that. Given that, at that moment, why not just tell your team to test the whole product? Because
this was part of that whole discussion, so it wasn't just this moment that I was considering the other communications as well.
But you didn't know what was coming next, did you?
No, but it was shortly after then, so I wouldn't have made an immediate
so why at that
decision.
moment, as soon as you see an external fire engineer telling you, through Aaron Chalmers, what we see here, didn't you go in and say, come on, we need to test the whole product?
I was still considering the views of the team and keeping the conversation going, but
Right. And let's look at the response that comes from Dan Ball, then, over the page on page 1. He says, I spoke, and I'm sorry, this is the second email from the bottom on that page, so 2/3 of the way down page 1. Dan Ball, 27th of June. Again, you're copied. I spoke with Franz about this as well, and he says as well because it appears that Mr. Chalmers had also had a discussion with Franz Papp. And he says, we are okay claiming class 0 from foil, as it can be interpreted like that. He's just got to take the fire engineer perspective and cover himself and give the conservative point of view, ideal situation, product is placed on market. But we can interpret class 0 from the face as shown in ADB. It's just we are doing what we attack competitors for doing, but low risk in Scotland, words with substrate, we do have an old report, but it needs updating. He feels we should test complete for low risk statement, etc., etc.
Yes.
And then in the last sentence, Dan Ball says, low risk we could do with a 40mm K15 being tested in a UK test house, or thinner if we have one, so should try a 40mm K15 max. It looks from that Dan Ball has pressed X over with his interpretation, the literal one that you've espoused earlier in your evidence today, and got an approval, but a caveated one.
correct.
Is that how you saw it at the time?
Yes.
So you would have known that this interpretation of ADB that you were discussing adopting was open to you as a matter of language, but not conservative and not ideal.
Yes, not conservative, yes.
Do you accept, leaving aside the tenability of the interpretation, that Kingspan and you, yourself personally, were prepared to sell K15 on the basis of a Class 0 representation based on a view of approved document B that was not conservative and not ideal?
Yes.
And if it was not conservative and not ideal, it would follow less safe.
Not necessarily, but I'll take the point.
Do you agree with me?
It wouldn't necessarily mean it's less safe, but I'd take your point.
Riskier. Would you be happy with riskier? It would be riskier to take the less conservative, not ideal approach.
Arguably, yes.
Well, what's the argument?
Because each fire or incident would have different effects on the product, and just by testing a small sample of the product, either with or without the facer, is just an indication of how the product would perform in a very small scale event. But most fires develop much more than that, and so I think the difference between the facer on the product and the facer off it would arguably have a less significant effect. But I take
Why not adopt the safer, conservative, ideal approach that Franz Papp had indicated to Darren Ball?
because we were happy with the interpretation of ADB.
Does this exchange tell us, Mr. Pargeter, that you were prepared to exploit a perceived ambiguity or literal interpretation in the approved document B in order to make sales?
I wouldn't say exploit. I'd say interpret.
Take advantage of.
Interpret the literal meaning.
All right, I'll try the question again with your preferred word. Does this exchange tell us that you were prepared to interpret ADB in a particular way in order to make sales?
Yes, that would be true.
And that particular way was less safe, less conservative, and not ideal?
Potentially, yes.
Even though that interpretation might place lives at greater risk than adopting the interpretation which Franz Papp was, or or the approach that Franz Papp was advising?
I don't think it does place lives at greater risk.
And I'm looking at the clock. I've got one or two questions on this.
We haven't finished this document, have we?
No, that's why.
Well, perhaps we should.
Thank you. A little bit lower down the email, in the third line, you are told by Dan Ball, it's just we are doing what we attack competitors for doing. What's that a reference to?
I don't recall. It might have been some historic issue. I don't know what we did there.
Did you ask him? Were you not interested to know what it was that Kingspan had deprecated in the past, but what it was now proposing to do?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
I didn't. I just didn't occur to me to do that.
Did it not occur to you at the time, even on what little you were told by Dan Ball, that here was Kingspan attacking its competitors in the past for testing the full facer and presenting the product as Class 0, when you are now proposing to turn 180 degrees and do the same?
It didn't, no.
Was there any point during this email run where you thought you should end the conversation, reprimand staff who'd suggested misleading marketing material and marketing K15 with fire standards that the product couldn't achieve, arrange an immediate team meeting and educate people, if not discipline them? Did that not occur to you?
No, it didn't.
And you were perfectly happy to go along with this because it would be able to increase your...
I thought the interpretation was a fair interpretation.
Let's go back to the email chain we're nearly at the top of. The second email down is from Aaron Chalmers, 27th of June 2016, at 11:42, and he responds, yeah, does seem a bit of a cheat, though, doesn't it? Claiming Class 0 for just a facer test, when, as you said, it's meant to be product is placed on the market. But like everything in ADB, it depends on who's interpreting the wording. Like the whole K15 issue and whether filler material includes the cladding. If a fire engineer believes the core will affect the facing performance, though, should we be claiming Class 0 based off facer performance alone, if 40mm K15 then fails to get Class 0? Now, and at this point, as we see just above that, perhaps it would be better if you had a meeting to discuss this matter verbally, and that's from Reshma Rudmaran to all of you. And then the email chain runs out. The first question is, did you actually continue that conversation verbally, as she puts it, rather than in writing?
We may have done. I think we may have got together and just agreed what we would do going forward.
And was the reason why it was suggested that you should have a meeting to discuss the matter verbally was that you didn't want a written record of the discussions?
No, I think it was just getting a long email chain and...
Now, when Aaron Chalmers says, yeah, it does seem a bit of a cheat, though, doesn't it? He was right about that. He put his finger on it.
I don't think it was a cheat. I mean, Aaron had originally suggested it as an interpretation, but I don't think it was a cheat. It was just a literal interpretation of ADB.
Yeah, but he says a bit of a cheat, though, doesn't it? Claiming Class 0 for just a facer test. It is right, isn't it? It is a bit of a cheat.
It's an interpretation.
Well, it's a bit of a cheat. It's cheating. And it's cheating because you know very well that's not what the people who put together approved document B meant. But you were taking advantage of a clever clog's reading of it to try to sell product.
I don't think it was a clever clog's reading of it. It was how it was written.
Do you accept what he says here in the last sentence, that if a fire engineer believes the core will affect the facing performance, should he be claiming Class 0 based off facer performance alone? That was a serious question and required a serious answer.
Yeah, on reflection, I do.
Why didn't you realise that at the time?
I think I was just relying on that interpretation that I got.
The reality, Mr. Pargeter, is that you knew jolly well at the time that the approach was less ideal, not conservative, and a bit of a cheat. So was your attitude at the time that any weakness in fire safety legislation was essentially fair game to be taken advantage of in order to make sales?
No, not at all.
That's not how you saw it.
No.
Is there any other explanation for adoption of the less conservative, less ideal approach?
Other than the test itself being not ideal test for testing insulation products. It wasn't designed for that.
And you say in your witness statement, your third witness statement, and just for the transcript, it's paragraph 3.49 on page 31, having set out this in discussions and interpretation, that you still stand by the decision today, and that was in September this year. Are you telling us that even though you knew at the time this interpretation was being explained or characterized to you by your staff, your technical staff, as a bit of a cheat, you would still make the same decision today?
I think it was a fair interpretation.
Would you make the
ADB.
same decision? Sorry. You think it was a fair, you still think it was a fair interpretation, do you?
Yes, I do.
And you would make the same decision today, would you? Only to test the foil, but present the whole product as Class 0?
I think what I would do today was probably make it clear in the literature that that's what we tested.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Well, we'll have a break there for some lunch. We'll come back at 2:10, please. And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're away. All right? Thank you very much. Right, 2:10 then, please.